With me now is California Congresswoman Barbara Lee. Congresswoman Lee, these past 14 months of the pandemic have revealed some major flaws in our country when it comes to addressing poverty. Unlivably low wages and health care systems that give priority to the rich. As the co-chair of the Majority Leader's Task Force on Poverty and Opportunity, you and your Democratic colleagues, your colleague Representative Jayapal, introduced new legislation this week that confronts all of these issues. You call it a, quote, a third reconstruction that will usher in a new age of reform for our nation's poorest and most disenfranchised citizens. Tell me about this.
Thank you, Reverend Al, for that question. Yes, we've been working on this legislation for several years now with, of course, Bishop Barber of the Poor People's Campaign and Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, chair of the Progressive Caucus. Now, a couple of things I have to say, and I want you to really recognize the fact and let the public understand that 140 million people live below the poverty line. That's the first thing. And COVID has exacerbated and really shined a light on what is taking place with low-wage, low-wealth individuals, poor people in this country. Secondly, when you look at the fact that COVID, because of COVID, 8 million more people fell below the poverty line. And so it's about time we come up with a comprehensive strategy to address the issues around poverty. And so this bill really sets forth a pathway out of poverty. It includes much of what has been introduced already in Congress. For example, of increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour, making sure that the child tax credit is made permanent. In my district alone, 108,000 children benefited from the last, measure in our bill that would actually make the child tax credit open for more people for a while, but not permanently. In California, we have the highest rate of child poverty in the country. Can you believe that? In the golden state of California. So we've got to get this under control.
Well, you know, the massive wealth gap in this country, aggravated by COVID, is only getting larger. Over 140 million Americans are considered poor, and mainly those of color are disproportionately impacted by everything thrown at them. I have had so many experts come on my show and talk about how America's poor are struggling, whether it be from lack of access to the internet, food, or education. We all know that change needs to happen now. It is unacceptable to continue this suffering. So how will your resolution put forward help eliminate poverty in America as soon as possible and avoid the Washington gridlock?
That's a very good question, because we see what the Washington gridlock, especially in the Senate, has produced, and that's really a reflection of Donald Trump's hold on the Republican Party. But that doesn't mean we can't fight to make sure that we do pass the $15 minimum wage increase, that we do pass the child tax credit, that we do pass assistance for rental assistance and housing and affordable housing strategies. And so we've got to fight. We have to understand, yes, the political realities right now. But here, for example, I have to go back to my own district. The average income of African-American families is $53,000 a year. The average income for white families is $125,000 a year. People are living on the edge, and so we can't say just because the political will in the Senate is not there that we don't organize. And this is about organizing with people around the country and making sure that this agenda that lifts people out of poverty is embraced by members of the House and of the Senate, and we're working very hard to do just that.
Now, let me go to this. This upcoming Monday, will mark 100 years since the violent Tulsa Race Massacre. Ahead of the anniversary, you spoke on the House floor and called for a time of racial healing and reparations. Also this week was the one-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder. From 1921 to now, America is still grappling with racism and race relations. As we look forward, What do you hope to see change as Black Americans continue to fight for equality 100 years after the massacre in Tulsa?
Yes, Reverend Al. Well, we see 100 years, and a lot of what the public really did not know about one of the worst racist acts of violence in our country now is becoming public. So the truth has to be told about the history of enslaved Africans being brought to this country and being enslaved for over 250 years, and how that relates to systemic racism and what we're seeing today in, for example, the brutal murder of Mr. George Floyd. And so we have to have this truth-telling moment, this day of reckoning in this country, because if we don't, we will never get to true equality and justice for all. Secondly, reparations. Once again, Tulsa is an example of why we have to pass H.R. 40. Reparations. The survivors and the descendants of this massacre, they still have not received their due. And it's time that we honor them and that we at least repair the damage for the descendants and survivors of what took place 100 years ago. Again, an example of why we need to look at reparations and begin to develop reparations for the African-American community and people who are descendants of enslaved Africans in this country. This is really a moment that we have to really dig deep and reflect and look at what, for example, how the states now are trying to dismantle the studies of racist policies in this country, and how they're trying to revise history. But if you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat it. And so we must address reparations, and we must address this moment as a truth-telling moment and pass these bills in Congress.
And you will not correct things if you do not deal with history. 100 years later, there's been some progress in some areas, but we are struggling to see if 10 Republicans in the Senate will vote on a police reform bill when we've seen a number of cases of police killings in a pandemic, 2 or 3 even after the verdict on George Floyd. I talked with President Biden by phone this week. He met with the family of George Floyd. And we really don't know, from your colleague, Congresswoman Bass, and from Senator Cory Booker, if Tim Scott can get 10 Republicans to even vote on an issue who in this era is one of the critical issues around race in this country.
It's a shame and disgrace that the Republicans don't even understand that this, first of all, is a very modest measure. And we need to get the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act passed. I agree with Senator Casey. At some point, you know, this filibuster has to be actually dismantled. If we're going to move forward on our democracy, protecting our democracy, voting rights, making sure that police reform begins to be part of our laws, and that certain issues that relate to police officers believing that they can be above the law. No person's above the law in this country. We have a lot of work we have to do. And I'll tell you one thing, we have this moment, the House, the Senate, and the White House. We have to seize the moment and do our work on behalf of the people.
And I think I might add that I was there at the trial several days when 10 policemen testified in the George Floyd case against a policeman. Even some of the policemen are showing some of the backbone that I hope more Republicans in the Senate show. If not, we've got to deal with the filibuster. Thank you, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, as always, for being with us.